Hello everyone and welcome back to BrickCats. Today I am reviewing Jorstad Designs' rendition of the MC75 cruiser Profundity, Admiral Raddus's ill-fated flagship in Rogue One. As always, please consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, leaving a comment, or supporting what I do in any other way you see fit. I greatly appreciate it. Rogue One was of course an awesome movie in general, but the Profundity has, in my opinion, the best entrance of any ship in Star Wars. The first real capital ship we see in the Rebel fleet is the Nebulon B at the end of Empire, and we don't see anything else until midway through Jedi. Gareth Edwards teases all of the ships we're familiar with in the opening scene at the Battle of Scarif: the Nebulon B, the GR-75 transports, the Corellian corvettes, and various starfighters, and then out of nowhere comes this massive cruiser with this huge fin on the bottom. Rebel capital ships in LEGO form are rarer than they are in the films. There are a couple of Tantive 4 models and the SDCC kind of midi-scale Nebulon B, as well as the Home 1 War Room hangar set, but there's nothing to match up against even the play-scale Star Destroyers. Also of passing interest is that the Separatist Navy has a lot of design language in common with the Mon Cal cruisers, so we see the space triangles from the Empire or the Republic facing off against these kind of space cigars in basically every era of the saga. This is an expensive model with the instructions themselves running $30. Without any modifications to the parts list, I was getting 7 stores and $647 before shipping and tax, or well north of $700 with shipping and tax included. I'll show you how to make one substitution that will save you over $60 right off the bat, and recommend some others to bring your costs down even further in the parts section. On an admin note, this is not my usual setup just because this model is so large, so bear with me if there are some weird camera angles or especially weird lighting. I think I got it okay, but it's definitely not as good as it usually is. In my reviews, I offer my opinions on aesthetics and model features, parts issues you might want to look out for, the build experience, the model's integrity, and I close out with my overall impression and pricing information in the conclusion. If you're watching this review, I assume that you have bought the instructions or are interested in buying them, and I also assume a basic level of familiarity with Brickling's ordering system and LEGO nomenclature. I only use genuine LEGO bricks, and I always purchase the instructions. I create these reviews for my own personal enjoyment, and in the hopes that my advice will make your experience more enjoyable and or less expensive. The Profundity measures just under 32 inches long, 6.25 inches wide at the base of the stand, and about 6.5 inches at the widest point of the ship right around here. And it sits about 14.75 inches from the base of the stand to the top of the communications tower here. It was scaled to the UCS Star Destroyer set 75252, and the ship and the stand are built together so you can't remove it and take it off to swoosh it around or anything like that. Before I go into the details, this is the second version of Jorstad Designs that they released for the Profundity just about a year ago in May of 2021. The original had 2 sets of trans-clear supports right about here on either side, and a U-shaped or a horseshoe-shaped stand, so I'm really glad they made this revision as this version looks a lot cleaner in my opinion. Starting up front, the bow of the ship is a series of wedge pieces with some slopes filling out the gaps. I think the underside of the bow is supposed to be a little bit more bulbous than it is, but that would likely be quite difficult with the available inventory of wedge pieces, and I do think that the designer made an effort to make the top and the bottom asymmetrical, as the bottom is a full brick height taller than the top. The underside of the front here is kind of a good example of this ship being, well, this section being a victim of the ship's own success, or of the model's own success. I didn't really like this part here with these slopes, and that's in kind of a sharp contrast to the rest of the ship, which is in general very smooth. Just behind the nose on the top here, there are some nicely angled subassemblies with these 4 long curved slopes, which are used throughout the model to give the cruiser its smooth exterior. And the light bluish gray surface is nicely broken up with some off-color highlights like the dark tan and the sand blue that you can see. On the underside, there are a few of the pod surface features that the Mon Calamari cruisers have all over them, and while these are a little large at this scale, they should be more like this one. This one's a little large. The available piece inventory limits what you can do here. The hangar bay fits the mini Tantive 4 build perfectly, and it's got these 2 clips here to clip onto this modified plate with bar, or you can stick the trans clear bar to have it hanging out on the underside just like I did earlier. The middle of the ship has the 2 most recognizable features of the MC75 series, the armor belt and the large fin that extends down from underneath. The 2 armor belts use hinge plates and panels to wrap around the hull, and in my opinion it's very well done and it fits nearly perfectly. There's some more off-color highlights. You can see the dark tan and the sand blue here to give it some variation, and I especially appreciate how the dark bluish gray section clearly sits higher than the hull in most areas. For example, in the back here, I can show you, it's raised in relief a little bit, which is screen accurate, and you can see it from a couple of angles in the movie. The rear section has these 2 bumps here, which are, according to the Rogue One visual guide, shield emitters, as well as the 12 turbo laser batteries on each side. The overall shaping is very impressive, even down to these 2 flag pieces on the underside of the communications tower to get that shape right. The long fin suspends the command pod below the ship, and according to the Rogue One visual guide, this was a deliberate design choice evoking a feared predator on Mon Cala. The fin looks great and is more or less accurate in its proportions given the piece limitations. There is a very slight gap right here between the wedge pieces and the wedge plates here and this angled section here. You can kind of see, trying to get it lined up with the camera here. Oh, there we go. You can kind of see back here. Not a big deal, and it's not very large. The parts list specifies this Technic ball for the bridge. I think this looks fine, but I think it's also a little bit too big. I did try and substitute some 1x1 round plates for that just to see how it would look. And I do think this is a little bit more in proportion to what we see in the movie, but this Technic ball works just fine. There's definitely some pressure, if you use the Technic ball, there's definitely some pressure on this curved slope here because this doesn't actually fit perfectly. But either way, it's not a big deal. And the only real omission that I noted was this transitional section between the armor belt and the fin, so I kind of added that myself. And without it, I think the cruiser loses some of the kind of organic shape that the Mon Calamari cruisers are known for. So this is just a simple 1x4 slope, and then some 2x4 wedges on a modified brick. And I just put some modified plates with studs there to hold it in place and kind of make that transition a little bit smoother. The top of the back section might have been my favorite part of the build, just because it was really cool on how all these angles came together here. The sections of slopes are angled with toe ball connections, and then these center sections, you can see here underneath these tiles, they kind of drop in and are not secured until you put on this tile spine shape right here. On the underside, you have the engineering sections with lots of dark bluish gray greebling, before you get to 4 of the 12 engines represented with the trans light blue round plates. The stand has a Technic core in both the column and the base. I added these tiles on either side of the column to cover up the stubs in the base. But of the two, if you're going to do any of these, I recommend covering up the tiles on either side of the column, because otherwise it hides these kind of ugly holes. And the tiles on the base I added mostly because I already had them, but I don't think the studs on the base look very bad at all. I only built the Tantive 4 side build, which is a modification of the official LEGO version that came with the UCS Star Destroyer, so if you already have the Star Destroyer, you can probably omit this. The other side builds do connect to the support column with trans clear bars, while parts for a minifigure stand and a placard are also included, and obviously I elected not to build those. So overall, the Profundity is an amazing model. It is huge, and it is very impressive when sitting on its stand. And like I said earlier, I am really glad that they reworked the configuration for the supports. I think having this one trans clear lift arm down there supporting the fin makes it look a lot cleaner, and the whole thing just kind of looks like it's speeding forward on the stand here. The Profundity and all of its side builds call for 415 elements and 3,286 pieces. As stated, the stand is an integrated part of the build and cannot be omitted. And as usual, the recommendations that follow will not be every color or part substitution you can make. There are certainly more pieces hidden than that could be any color. And I focused on the part substitutions that offer the largest reductions in cost for the effort it takes me to find them. So first I'm going to start off with the main build because these are the parts issues that will affect presumably everybody who wants to build this model. And later on I'll probably bookmark it. I'll list the parts for the side builds for the smaller ships and the name and minifigure plates. The single best substitution you can make are the 14 plate 1x1 in Sand Blue, part 3024. And I was astounded at how expensive these were when doing my initial research for this build, and it turns out that these only came in one 2003 Harry Potter set, the Nocturne Alley, set 4720, and there were only 2 of those in that set. 13 of these should be changed to 1x1 tiles in Sand Blue, part 3070B, which will bring your total to 20 because there are 7 of them already specified. And the last one should be changed to a 1x1 plate in dark tan, light bluish gray, dark bluish gray, or tan, because in step 282 you need a plate and not a tile. In all the other instances, there are enough studs to make the difference between a tile and a plate not matter, and you can mostly see these spread throughout the armor belt. So this should be a Sand Blue 1x1 plate, but I've used a tile here just because you can sandwich them in there with no problem, and they're kind of spread throughout. There's another one here, here, and then on the side you can see some here, etc, etc. Of course, these don't have to be Sand Blue at all. They could be pretty much any neutral color, but I like the Sand Blue. I think it's a nice color and it works really well. There are 33 Technic Brick 1x16 with holes, part 3703, specified light bluish gray. These can be any color, but if you're going to buy them anyway, light bluish gray isn't the worst color to have on hand if you plan to tear this down in the future and reuse the parts. Otherwise, I would just go with the cheapest color. And all of those are found underneath the outer shell here. The way this is built is that you build up a Technic core, which is probably not surprising, and then all these little side assemblies go to cover that up. So those 33 1x16 Technic bricks are forming the central core that go all the way down the spine of the ship inside. The 4 black 6x6 plates, part 3958, are all on the bottom of the stand and are not visible and can be any color. And that's where those 2 blue ones are, and I did have 2 black ones already, so I used black there, but they're hidden. The 8 brick 1x2 by 1 2/3 with studs on side, part 22885, are hidden and can be any color. These form the connection points for these long side assemblies back here, and they're just above the engine greebling here. There is only 1 plate 1x2, part 3023 in white listed, but you actually need 2, one each for the Tantive 4 and another for the Ghost if you elect to build the Ghost. I found that there was not enough clutch or friction using the 2x2 round plate alone with axle hole in dark bluish gray, part 4032 in the hangar bay, if you want to put the Tantive 4 in the flight position. Now this is meant to have this bar stick into the axle hole and support the Tantive 4 with, just like that, but I don't think there's enough friction there. So I recommend adding the tile 2x2 round with open stud, part 18674, on top of that existing 2x2 round plate, and that holds that bar much better. The following Technic pieces are hidden and can be any color and form the base of the stand here, and this excludes the light bluish gray 1x16 Technic bricks I mentioned earlier. The one Transclear Technic lift arm 1x15 part 32278 forms the connection between the fin and the base here, and this could also probably work just fine in black if you got one already. Otherwise, Transclear wasn't actually as expensive as I thought it was going to be. There are a couple of off-color Technic lift arms hidden inside the central spine here that can be any color. And likewise, there are some off-color plates that are hidden and can be any color, and those are just used to fill out the central support. In addition to the off-color Technic lift arms, there are two Technic lift arms 1x9 in dark bluish gray, part 40490, that are hidden and can be any color, And finally, the following off-color bricks are hidden and can be any color. The following lists are parts for the side builds, and of the side builds, I recommend most the Tantive 4, but the rest you can build or omit according to your preference. And instructions and parts for the placard and minifigure stand are also included. And finally, the following parts were much cheaper from LEGO due to the quantities involved. Instructions for the Profundity and all of the side builds total 459 steps, and 425 of those are for the Profundity alone. The pieces or assembly you add in any given step are outlined in red, which is generally okay. The red can sometimes be a bit hard to see on the instructions from time to time, since this is a big model and you're building big sub-assemblies, but most of the time this is not an issue if you take your time. There were a couple of viewing angle problems I ran into, none of them critical but worth noting. In steps 2 and 8, it's not clear that the Technic pins are mirrored from step 1, and I just kind of assumed they were, and it worked out. In step 80, when you're adding the center of the rear underside greebling, you can't see where the connection point is towards the center of the model. It's kind of obvious when you look at it in person, but I feel like it would have been reasonable to add an actual photo to make it explicit here. In step 153, you can't see where the second blue 1x10 plate goes until step 154. And in step 291, you can't tell where this boat stud is supposed to go, and it's in the same place as on the other side. As for the build itself, there were definitely some connections that were a lot more finicky than I expected, and the first was the starboard side with the fin in step 139. It's difficult to make because there are connections at the top here as well as towards the rear, and I had to really force things to bend in uncomfortable ways to get the Technic pins in the vertical lift arm, as well as the studs in the 1x3 modified plate above, up here. After the fin was finished, I found that the command pod had a lot of stability problems. It's quite difficult to get these curved 2x2 slopes to connect in step 147, and the problem seems to be misalignment caused by the 1x1 round plate on top of the camber piece that you put back in step 118, way inside there. I removed the 1x1 round plate and put these 1x2 tiles you can see right here to cover the small gap. The pod is also essentially built in a forward and a rear section as specified, and there's nothing holding the two halves together. I had this back section starting at this 1x6 slope piece here come off a couple of times, so I ended up having to modify this with this 1x6 tile here that holds the front and the back sections together to kind of solve that stability problem. I had a little bit of trouble getting this top nose section to connect in step 211. The angles are created with hinge plates. They're very tight up by these 1x1 round corner tiles, and it's also hard to see all of the connection points. It takes some time to work out the shaping to get it all to fit, but if you keep at it, it won't be too bad. As for build order, you build the stand and the base first, followed by the structural elements inside the ship here, before you start the exterior subassemblies. And up until about step 220, the model is very front heavy because you do the nose sections first. So when you pick it up, you need to be prepared for it to dive kind of that way, and don't let it hit your desk or whatever you're building it on, because things will shatter. Like I mentioned in the parts section, step 282 requires a 1x1 plate instead of a 1x1 tile, and it's specified in sand blue, which is very expensive, so replace that with a light bluish gray or dark tan or dark bluish gray plate and you'll be fine. And actually, it's right here. This is the only one I used in tan, just so I can point that out. So you can see that you need it because it's a 1x1 connection between this piece here and the piece right above it. The connections of the rear sections in step 263 and 305 are pretty long, and as a result they're kind of unwieldy, and I found these really difficult to place correctly because there's no good image in the instructions. The two toe balls are the only two true connection points, and the rest of the assembly sits on this shelf created by these dark bluish gray tiles. The rear toe ball assembly often came loose, and I had to disassemble part of the back, these last three sections here, or last three slopes here, to apply pressure to get back on. I mentioned earlier that these strips just kind of fall into the model here and sit there without being secured, which means that you can't turn this model upside down or else they'll fall out. And I did actually have a couple of moments when I forgot this and turned things upside down to put things on and then had these fall out. It's not a huge deal because you can put them back together pretty easily, but just remember that until these long sections are secured by these tiles here, they're just resting there. They're not actually connected. I found it impossible to get this assembly right here in step 315 into place in one piece, specifically this light bluish gray section that you can kind of see where my thumb is. You need to put the 2x4 plate that you can barely see right here into place first, followed by the two 2x2 slope 45s on either side, right here and right here. And then you slide the dark bluish gray part, which is this section, around the fin and secure it to these studs inside. Finally, when building out the armor belt, the instructions tell you to try and make the various hinge brick connections by installing the hinge and the brick separately, and then trying to force the hinge plate into the hinge brick. I did not have very good results with this method. The armor belt is a little finicky when you're trying to put it on, so pushing a hinge plate into a hinge brick takes a lot more force than trying to connect a stud to an anti-stud, especially if the stud is a hollow stud. I found it generally easier to install the hinge plates inside the hinge bricks and then connect it to the studs on the piece that you're connecting it to. And even then it was still a little bit frustrating, but I just stick to the stud connections instead of the hinge connections, and I think it's a lot easier. This model is one that you sit on your shelf or desk and don't handle too much, but the model is reasonably solid. These sections on the armor belt are only connected at one end, so they do move around a bit and you can knock them off. And if you don't modify the command pod, it is prone to breaking in half, like I said. Of course, if you do build the side builds, you need to watch the 12L bars holding them to the stand or the Tantive to the ship itself. And the only other area that I'll mention are these sections at the back here. You can kind of see that this is not flush with this line of slopes, and it should be. So these are only connected about here, and so these parts tend to flex outwards on both sides. So you can see there's a little bit of play right there. It's not gonna pop apart on you, but it does. It's not quite how it should be. I built this several months ago, and it's been on my desk ever since, even though it barely fits. And I really love this model, and it is truly impressive on display. As with any large model, the price is the elephant in the room, and no matter how you slice it, the profundity is certainly not cheap. Like I said before, without any modifications to the parts list, I was getting 7 stores and $647 before shipping and tax, or likely about $720 with shipping and tax included. Substituting only the 1x1 sand blue plates with the tile brings it down to 6 stores and $586 without shipping and tax, or about $658 with shipping and tax. If you substitute the 1x1 sand blue plate and eliminate the side builds, it brings it down to 6 stores and $556 without shipping and tax, or about $628 with shipping and tax. Finally, still omitting the side builds and substituting the 1x1 sand blue plate, if you only get the 12 elements I mentioned in the parts section from Pick-a-Brick, that will cost you $99.65 plus tax, or about $107 depending on where you live. If you then get all the rest of the parts from Bricklink, your Bricklink cost goes down to 5 stores and $343 before shipping and tax, or about $393 with shipping and tax. Since shipping from LEGO is free for orders over $35, your total cost becomes approximately $500. And you can save even more by buying more from Pick-a-Brick, especially if you look through the stores the algorithm on Bricklink gives you, and do your research on any of the elements that have either large quantities or are inordinately expensive. I have a feeling you could probably get this down to at least $475 total by buying more pieces directly from LEGO, both through the cost savings on the element itself and possibly reducing your store count. Thanks as always for watching my review of Jorstad Designs Profundity model. If you built the Profundity, you have something to share that I left out, or have a question about something I didn't cover, please leave them below in the comments. Remember to leave the video a like, subscribe to the channel, or follow me on Instagram if you haven't already. I hope to see you back next time.